what he has saved up for them, beyond the provisions that he's made as a father, as far as inheritance, he says, I'm willing to give up my present living as well. What I have right now, not just what I've saved up for you, even to his own life if it's needed. I will gladly, he said, as I get back to our text here, I will gladly spend for you everything I have, and myself as well. So we see a glimpse of the boasting that he has done, and that he hated to do, and that it was just done for their good. And if I love you more, will you love me less, is the point. He pledges this to them like he has to others. You'll notice in Philippians, the 2nd chapter, in verse 17, that Paul said, but even if I am poured out like a drink offering on the sacrifice and service coming from your faith, I am glad and rejoice with all of you. And so he's made pledges like this where I'm willing to give myself. Remember what he said in Romans chapter 9 and verse 3 about his Jewish brothers? When we were studying Romans, like a few weeks ago.
That he would give himself.
To what extent?
So that they could be saved.
Yes, and so give himself to what extent?
Death.
Not just death. To go to hell for them. I'd be willing to lose my soul if it would meant that my brothers, according to the flesh, would be saved. Which is... That's amazing. And I don't think he was telling a lie there. So we get a glimpse of that, of his love for them. And when he says, I will spend, the Greek word is dapanao, and it means to spend freely. So there is a pressure from them to do so. You know, he's willing to spend and to expend, which means to exhaust, which means to have it all consumed. All of it is spent. And as we said just a minute ago, that includes his physical life. You know, remember what we saw in the beginning part middle part of chapter 11? How many times did we see Paul in physical danger? Beaten, stoned, shipwrecked, flogged. In fact, there in verse 23, he says, I was exposed to death again and again. Well, how could he do that? Because of this. Because he was willing. He was willing to give his life for them. And again, I think that is what we should be able to expect of any father with regards to his children. And so he says, if I love you more, will you love me less? What a paradox, what irony is that? And so how could that possibly be? Normally, if someone shows you love, what's returned? Love. It's generally reciprocated. And he's shown them that they are not some sort of rejected child. He's not looking at them as being a bad seed or anything like that. And he's wondering if his rivals, if the false apostles that are there in Corinth have had such a negative effect on them, a negative effect on them with regard to their relationship with Paul, that the more he loves them, the less they end up loving him because of what these guys are doing. And it's almost like he's asking, do I need to hate you to have you love me again? And I mean, as their father, he can't do that. He cannot hate them. So his only recourse here is to continue to love them without really a lot of hope of reciprocation. And maybe that's why he's bringing it up again, just to look at what you're doing. It's like a Jewish mother who said, I brought you into this world. I carried you for 9 months. I went through labor, talking about all the things that she did and suffering and sacrifice, trying to pull some love out of this child for her. And it's almost like that here with Paul. So how seriously does Paul take his fatherhood status? It's very serious. It's a priority with him. Any other comments on that? Okay, question 6. What was Paul's history of interaction with the Corinthians in verses 16 and 17? He said, in my translation, be that as it may, I have not been a burden to you. Yet, crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery. Did I exploit you through any of the men I sent to you? So, again, Paul reminds them, again, something that they know, not only from the fact that he's probably told them that almost half a dozen times in this book, that I haven't been a burden to you, but they know from the fact that when he was there with them for almost 2 years, he was never a burden to them. They cannot point to a time when he was. And so, what do you call this next statement then? Be that as may, I've never been a burden to you. And then what do you take from that last statement in verse 16? Yet crafty fellow that I am, I caught you by trickery.
He's saying what the false apostles are saying about him.
Perhaps. I think it's built on that. I think it's built on that statement. But listen, this can't be characterized by anything else but biting sarcasm. This is biting sarcasm. The word crafty, this is the only place it's found in the New Testament. It's panorgos. And this is, we have a couple of uses in our culture right now for crafty. If someone is amazing at quilts and knitting and embroidery or pottery or whatever, we might call them crafty, which indicates that they're clever. They are creative, and that would be being crafty in a good sense. This word in Greek, though, means villainy and treachery. The same kind of thing that we would describe, how we would describe a fox who was able to get into the hen house and get the chickens and then get out without being caught, okay? And the word actually has to do, the word caught is used to describe bait that you use in fishing. Every fisherman is a crafty person like this, okay? They bait the hook, they use a lure, they sharpen the hook, whatever it is, so that when they throw it out there, poor little innocent fishy, thinks, oh, free lunch, and doesn't realize it's actually the fisherman's lunch that's being provided there. And so it refers to deceit, it refers to trickery. So you have villainy and treachery, deceit and trickery, okay? Are any of those words that Paul wants people to use with regards to his ministry? No. So there's nothing true about it. And so again, he's being sarcastic with them. But I think Greg may be right, because that's what these guys are saying about him. He is the Apostle Paul, we wouldn't even call him an apostle. Paul is such a villain. He's so slick. He's trying to get you to collect money for some faceless Judean Jews over here that are in need, and all he's interested in is lining his own pockets with that money and taking advantage of you. Which really doesn't make sense, because how much money did he take from them for the 18 months he was there? Zero. And so, they know, these enemies know, that whatever they're saying about him is hurtful to Paul, and it is. The statement, if I love you more, will you love me less, just yells out pain. You know, the more I do for you, the more I sacrifice for you, the more that I give myself to you, it seems like you love me less. And they also know that Paul's refusal to take these funds, absolutely refusing. In fact, when I come, I'm not going to take them then. What's that make the guys that are there forcing them to pay them look like? Yeah, like crooks. And the reason they feel bad about it, and the reason they feel bad is because they are bad, okay? And so they, again, are trying to display or say that Paul is using a bait and switch con game on them with this money. And so he asks them right at the end of there, in verse 17, did I exploit you through any of the men I sent to you? So when he sent Timothy first, and Timothy was there, and I think that's when Timothy wrote to Paul and said, Paul, you need to come over. Paul was in Ephesus. You need to come over. There's big problems. And so Paul makes this trip over to Corinth, which was the painful trip. Didn't turn out well at all. Paul gets back, writes the harsh letter, sends it with Titus, meets Titus later. And so Paul is saying, so I sent you, maybe Silas had been there, maybe Apollos had been there, Timothy, Titus. Did any of those guys that I sent to you, did any of them mistreat you? Did they take advantage of you? Did they exploit you in any way? And listen, Titus, I think, is Paul's exhibit A for character. And they appear to have loved Titus. And if Titus conducted himself with honesty and sincerity, that will reflect on Paul who sent him. He's doing what Paul asked him to do. And again, if you notice in verse 18, we'll get to that in a second. What I want you to see here is that he has sent Titus several times. And that's why he mentions it in the next verse. All of these guys are representatives of Paul. And he's using them as witnesses for him. So then I just about answered question 7 for you. Who does he use an example of his dealings with them? And the answer is Titus, explicitly. There were a lot of guys that Paul sent, but he's naming now Titus, which again just tells you how much Paul thought of him. His reputation, Paul's reputation, is resting on Titus' shoulders. Here's who I'm willing. It's like God with Satan in the book of Job. God's reputation and his character was placed on Job's shoulders. Because Satan says, well, the only reason he worships you is because you give him everything he wants. Okay, take everything. Well, he's still, if you touch him, if you let me touch him, he'll curse you. Okay, touch him. That's Job was God's exhibit A for his own character. In that same way, Titus is Paul's exhibit A. And so if he conducted himself with honor and sincerity, then that's going to reflect, as we said, on Paul. And it's a rhetorical question. Did I exploit you through any of the men I sent you? What's the answer to that? No. No, I didn't. Verse 18 says, I urged Titus to go to you, and I sent our brother with him. We don't know who that one is. Titus did not exploit you, did he? Did we not walk in the same footsteps by the same Spirit? Aren't Titus and I being guided by the same Holy Spirit? Aren't we the one and the same here? And listen, he knows Titus behaved himself completely correctly while he was there. He knows the Corinthians know that too. And Paul's point is, what is true of Titus is also true of the one who sent him. So Paul is the one who infused Titus with the proper attitude and the proper decorum and how to approach them and what to say. He told him, follow this. We follow the same course. The word for course means footsteps. He followed in my footsteps, exactly what I said. And so Titus is acting in the same way Paul did and in the same way Paul is. Any questions on that? Okay, question 8. What was Paul's motivation for all that he said in this epistle according to verse 19? See, I've been answering too many questions now. I'm going to make you answer some questions.
To spiritually strengthen the Corinthians?
Okay? Anybody else? He says in verse 19, have you been thinking all along that we've been defending ourselves to you? We have been speaking in the sight of God as those in Christ, and everything we do, dear friends, is for your strengthening. So, translations vary here. It's kind of an interesting statement that he makes here. Have you been thinking all along that we have been defending ourselves to you? Like this whole letter is just one big defense treatise for me to make me look better, for me to justify myself? The New American Standard Bible and the American Standard Version have this as a statement. It's not a question. Almost every other translation has it as a question. And what is it about the Greek, the original Greek copies that we have? What's one of the characteristics of it?
They don't have question marks.
They don't have punctuation at all. They don't even have space between words. Okay? I mean, it's just letter right after letter. And if you get out here to the end of your papyrus or your vellum or whatever it is, and you just started a word and you had room to put one letter, and there's 8 letters in that word, the next 7 are the end of that word. Does that tell you the amazing and immensity of the job of translating those things? And so there's no punctuation in the Greek, so it's a matter of interpretation whether or not it's a question mark or not. So we know that since chapter 10, what has Paul been doing? Let me just take a wild guess. He's been defending himself. Yeah. And so naturally, what would they think? They would think that he's defending himself because that's what he's been doing. So, but Paul asks, have you been thinking all along that we've been defending ourselves? And so what would Paul mean by that? Because again, I think that's a rhetorical question. And the answer should be no, we haven't been doing that. Let me ask you, maybe it can help you get along here. So what is the general hierarchy that's present when one judges and one defends? Where do we put these persons, the judge and the defendant? Where are they? Who's this? The judge. And who's this? The defendant. So if Paul is really defending himself to them, where's Paul? And where's he putting them? Yes. The greater always judges the lesser. And the one being judged is in a subordinate position. And Paul wants it on the record in this letter that despite the fact that he has indeed been defending himself against these false charges, neither the Corinthians nor those false apostles in Corinth have any jurisdiction over him.
Was that next part?
That the Corinthians nor the false apostles have jurisdiction over him. They are not in the seat of judges. They are not over him and trying to determine whether he's guilty or innocent. They will not ultimately determine whether or not he's a true apostle. He's been giving this information, but again, the reason he's been giving the information is not so that they'll come back and say, oh, Paul, you were so right. Now I see your arguments. You are exactly right about that. We give you the stamp of approval that you are a true apostle. On your way, my good man.
So is
What does he say at the end of this verse? Why did he do it? To strengthen them.
yeah, so the scenario you started out with they're above him, has been reversed.
Yes, right here.
I'm here.
Again, I will just remind you again, I've asked this question I don't know how many times in this class since we started 1 Corinthians, I guess. What does it say in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 1 and 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 1 about Paul's apostleship?
Paul, apostle of Christ.
By
The will of God.
by the will of God. I am an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. What if the Corinthians don't agree with that? Who cares? Okay? That's your opinion on that doesn't matter. Your rejection of that doesn't change the facts. Okay, that's the point. And so Paul wants them to make sure that he understands. Do you think that I've been trying to get you to finally see that I'm a true apostle? No, I'm doing this so you can be stronger. I'm in the high seat here. I'm still instructing. This is the means by which I'm trying to instruct you. Yes, John.
Always looked at that and wondered whether or not it wasn't really that he was so much making a defense, because he wasn't, but rather an explanation.
Yeah.
All the time he had been trying to explain to them what he was and what his purpose was. And here he's saying, all I was doing, I wasn't trying to defend myself. I was trying to explain to you so that you could be built up.
Right. Well, so you have these, however many there are, these false apostles, these ministers of Satan that are there in Corinth. You also have some other people there, we're going to see before we get to the end here, the end of this chapter, who have, it looks like, restored some of the sinfulness and pitfalls that he addressed in 1 Corinthians. And so they've gone back to that, which I think is probably part of the reason Paul made the painful visit, to go over there and see if that was the case and try to get them to stop, and they wouldn't. Whoever this person was, or a couple of people were, just told him to get out of town. We don't need you here, and he left, kind of shamefaced. Which, when he got back, he wrote that letter that turned things around, at least from Titus' report that he gave to him. And so we have these guys, and he's trying to bring these people back to Christ, not bring them back to him, but to the Lord who died and who he brought them to. And he was their father to bring them there. He knows they still get to make their own choices, but he also knows who he is and the danger that they're in. And so he's taken this path, as John mentioned there, to just try to remember when I was there, remember what I did, remember how I lived. You know about my history. You know about all the things that I've done. It's not a matter of defense. It's just I'm setting out the facts here. And in fact, they know that he has never conducted himself in an improper manner towards them. And the only person Paul answers to is who? God. That's it. And not only but he'll answer to God with regards to the Corinthians too. I mean, he's standing there. This is my work. And all the other churches, which is why in chapter 11 he says there's this daily concern that he has for all the churches. One of the things that it was a burden for him. And listen, I would guess on the scale of churches, Corinth is the one that's pulling it down more than just about any other one. Which is why he says here, we have been speaking in the sight of God as those in Christ. And that is about as close a cousin to an oath as you can get without just expressly stating it. He views himself as standing in God's courtroom, not the courtroom of the Corinthians or of these false apostles. And the only reason he has access to that courtroom is because of the blood of Christ, because Jesus is the one that put him there. You see the same thing, and I'm hoping this reference is right, in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Go over there real quick. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Starting at verse 1, he said, This then is how you ought to regard us, as servants of Christ, and as those entrusted with the mysteries God has revealed. Now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. Now listen to this. I care very little if I'm judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in the darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. At that time, each will receive their praise from God. That's exactly, in a expanded way, what Paul is saying here. So why did he then make such a obvious... Yes, Jonathan.
I think it'd be interesting question you're about to ask.
Okay, so why did he make that defense? Why did he approach it that way?
Yeah.
And it was like everything else he does, as he says, dear friends, for your strengthening.
So on that note,
Pardon me?
on that note,
Okay.
man, if he had left them fully equipped, when he first, he spent a year and a half there with them, was it?
Right.
He leaves, they're fully equipped.
They should be,
They
yes.
should be, yeah. And now he's gone, and these other men come in, and they start undermining everything that Paul did to teach them.
Right.
And they start questioning, do we have everything we need? Did Paul give us everything we need? Can we trust Paul?
Right.
I mean, when I see Paul say, I'm doing this for your strengthening, that's what comes to my mind. Like, I didn't waste my time with you. And you can trust what I left you with.
Right.
Don't let these men that came afterwards make you think that there's something else that you
Right.
need.
Well, and you think about it, in a way, they were already thinking that. Because he didn't write 1 Corinthians before he went to Corinth. He wrote it afterwards. And what do they think is the best gift that God ever could give anybody? Tongues. So they're already, weighing and judging. And so you say, yeah, they were fully equipped. There were those who could discern spirits. Maybe they were not using it. Maybe they're wishing I had a gift of tongues. And maybe they were grieving the Holy Spirit because of the fact that they weren't using it, and so they weren't being able to continue it. Because they'd forgotten. They'd left it. It's kind of interesting, and I don't know how much you'll think of this, but this expression here in verse 19, where he says, and everything we do, dear friends, is for your strengthening. The last time he said dear friends to them was in chapter 7 and verse 1. So that's been a while ago. There's been a lot of water that went under the bridge since he said that before. Okay, so let's see if we can finish this one. I'm pretty sure question 9 is the last one of this. Nope, we're not going to finish that. I have 2.5 pages of notes on this one. What is the situation Paul is afraid of that he's going to be afraid of when he comes? In other words, what is he afraid that he's going to find there? So let's read verses 20 and 21. Let's let that percolate a little bit in our brains. For I'm afraid that when I come, I may not find you as I want you to be, and you may not find me as you want me to be. I fear that there may be discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder. I'm afraid that when I come again, my God will humble me before you, and I will be grieved over many who have sinned earlier and have not repented of the impurity, sexual sin, and debauchery in which they have indulged. So, he's already voiced in chapter 11 and verse 3 that he's afraid that they have been led astray from the true gospel already. They've got people there that are preaching a different Christ, preaching a different spirit, preaching a different gospel, as he pointed out there. And his fear now is that this letter that he's writing here won't succeed in winning the ones that have been deceived by these false apostles away from them. And he's also afraid that the conditions that he left, or that he wrote about in 1 Corinthians, that he apparently tried to address in the second visit and addressed in that letter that we don't have, hasn't worked. And he's not certain that that's going to be the case. He's just afraid of it. That I may not find you as I want you to be. That I won't find you free from their influence, the false apostles. That I won't find you as having purified yourself of all of these carnal desires and outrages that he mentions in verse 20, and the sexual sins and such that he's been battling at Corinth from the first letter. He's also afraid they won't find him as they want him to be, which is I don't know if you remember when you were small. I do. My dad worked away. Okay, he was at Hanford. We lived in Yakima, so it's about a 40-minute drive. And so my mom was home after we got after school. And listen, if we got into trouble that was fairly bad, bad enough that she didn't want to handle the discipline and she's going to let my dad take care of it. She could have said, I don't think you're going to find your dad the way you want him to be when he gets here. Okay? So when Paul says, I don't think you're going to find me the way you want me to be, is a pretty clear indication that discipline is coming. He asked, remember, do you want me to come with love or with a whip? Okay? And in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 11, he says, such people should realize that we are in our letters when we are absent, we will be in our actions when we are present. Okay? So the same harshness and same strength that you see in my letters, they're going to be there when I arrive. Okay? And so his faltering demeanor, his shamefacedness, or even the fact that he appeared to leave with his tail between his legs after that painful visit is not going to happen this time. And I'll just give this beginning part, and we'll look briefly at these 8 things. We'll start them next week. There's 8 conditions that he does not want to see among the Corinthians when he arrives. And he hopes that he finds them different, at least in these areas. And it seems, listen, you look through that list that we just read there: discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder. When you see those, when you try to picture what that looks like, what does it look like? if you see that in a crowd of people, if you see that in a congregation of people, what do you see? Yeah. Do you see chaos, and you see a congregation that's divided and it's biting and devouring itself? And it seems like he believes all of these are present. He's not just picking things out of the air. There was a tendency to division and jealousy and quarreling from 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 11. Right out of the bag. They already had parties. I'm of Paul, I'm of Apollos, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Christ. So the false apostles' presence among them seems to me to have reignited all of these things and fanned them back into flame, including the sexual sins. Which kind of makes me wonder, we talked about the fact that the Judaism that let me put down the next date would be March. Anybody know what next Wednesday is? 5th? 5th and 6th. Is that along with this Judaistic teaching that is trying to get people to go back to the law, and circumcision and the Sabbath and all of that there may in fact be, and I haven't read this anywhere, from what I've just read in verse 20, it seems to me there may have also been some Gnosticism, which says that what you do in your body doesn't affect your spirit. They're kind of like separate. And so, and listen, the later writings of Paul, Gnosticism was getting a pretty good hold on the early church in that first century. Maybe this is the beginnings of some of that. Okay. So we will be in the next lesson next week, which is the last lesson. I have given myself 2 weeks to get through this rest of this. And that's just a guess. I can go another week. I don't have to. So, but